The phone
I
rang in a
understand
Hollywood office
completely. The
at
papers are
2:47
secure.
in the afternoon.
Good. Leave them in
An
the usual
unexpected
place.
call.
It will be
A
done.
voice the club owner
In the
recognized
smoky
immediately.
haze, my heart
Though he'd
finds
never
its
spoken to her
singing
before.
with blues. I have
Marilyn
no
Monroe
other
didn't make phone calls
choice.
to nightclub managers. She didn't need to. The world came to her. But on this particular Tuesday in 1955, she was calling him. And what she said in the next 3 minutes would crack open a door that one of the greatest voices in American music couldn't open herself. This is the story of two women. One whose face defined an era. Another whose voice transcended time. Both were legends. Both were underestimated. And both understood something about invisibility that the world refused to see. Before we step into that phone call, into that moment when power met principle, here's the question that pulls everything into focus. What does it mean to be seen when the world has decided what you're allowed to be? Marilyn Monroe knew. Ella Fitzgerald knew. And in 1955 they found each other in the most unexpected way. Ella Fitzgerald was the best vocalist in America, and everyone in the music industry knew it. Her voice could do things that seemed impossible. Perfect pitch. 3-octave range. The ability to scat sing with the precision of a jazz instrument while maintaining a warmth that made every listener feel personally embraced. She'd won every award, recorded with every major label, performed in jazz clubs from Harlem to Chicago. But in 1955 there was one place she couldn't perform. The places that mattered most to a mainstream career. The elegant supper clubs and high-profile venues where Hollywood stars gathered and careers were made visible to the wider American public. The reason was simple and brutal. Ella Fitzgerald was black. And in mid-1950s Hollywood, that meant closed doors, regardless of talent. The Mocambo was the most prestigious nightclub in Los Angeles. Frank Sinatra performed there. Nat King Cole, despite his own struggles with racism, had managed to break through there. It was the venue where being seen mattered as much as being heard. Where photographers from Life magazine and gossip columnists gathered. Where a single performance could transform a respected artist into a household name. Ella's manager had been trying to book her at the Mocambo for 2 years. The answer was always the same polite variation of no. Not the right fit. Scheduling conflicts. Perhaps another time. The owner, Charlie Morrison, never said the real reason out loud. He didn't have to. Everyone understood the code. But what the world heard when Ella sang, and what the industry allowed her to access, were two completely different things. She could sell out Carnegie Hall. She could record albums that critics called transcendent. But the invisible barrier remained. The one that said black performers belonged in jazz clubs and black neighborhoods, not in the glamorous mainstream spaces where white audiences decided who became truly famous. Now here's what most people don't know about that barrier. It wasn't just about Ella. It was about what her presence would mean. Club owners feared that booking black performers would make white customers uncomfortable, that the elegant, wealthy clientele would stop coming if the entertainment didn't match their expectations of who belonged in their spaces. The economics of prejudice were wrapped in the language of business decisions. And Ella, no matter how extraordinary her talent, couldn't argue with economics she had no power to change. She'd tried. She'd been patient. She'd been professional. She'd let her voice speak for itself. But the door to the Mocambo remained closed. And then Marilyn Monroe made a phone call. Marilyn Monroe in 1955 was at the height of her fame. 7-Year Itch had just been released. Her image in the white dress, standing over the subway grate, had become one of the most iconic photographs in American culture. She was beautiful, famous, desired by millions. The world saw her as the ultimate symbol of Hollywood glamour. But Marilyn understood something that her public image carefully concealed. She understood what it felt like to be reduced to how you looked rather than who you were. To be underestimated constantly. To have your intelligence dismissed, your depth ignored, your humanity flattened into a persona that served everyone's purposes except your own. She'd been a foster child. She'd been poor. She'd been told she was pretty but not smart, desirable but not valuable. The dumb blonde persona that made her famous was a cage she couldn't escape, even as it made her rich. Every time someone called her a bombshell and nothing else, she felt the same reduction. Different from what Ella experienced, certainly, but reduction nonetheless. And Marilyn loved jazz. She loved the emotional honesty of it, the improvisation, the way it refused to pretend. In jazz, she heard something real that Hollywood's manufactured perfection could never provide. And she'd heard Ella Fitzgerald. She'd gone to small clubs in New York where Ella performed. She'd sat in the back incognito and listened to that voice transform the room. Watching Ella perform, Marilyn saw something she recognized. A woman whose talent was so overwhelming it should have made everything else irrelevant. But it didn't. Because the world had rules about who got access to what. And talent alone couldn't break those rules. So when Marilyn heard that Ella couldn't get booked at the Mocambo, she didn't just feel sympathy. She felt recognition. And she decided to do something about it. The phone call went like this. Mr. Morrison, this is Marilyn Monroe. Charlie Morrison, owner of the Mocambo, nearly dropped the receiver. Marilyn Monroe was calling him personally. His club was already successful, already prestigious. But having Marilyn Monroe's attention meant something beyond business. It meant being part of her world. "Miss Monroe, what can I do for you? I want you to book Ella Fitzgerald." There was a pause. Morrison's mind was already calculating. Marilyn Monroe calling personally about a booking. This wasn't a casual request. "I've heard Miss Fitzgerald is very talented." He started carefully. "She's the best singer in America," Marilyn interrupted. "And I want to see her perform at your club." Another pause. Morrison was trying to figure out the angle, the benefit, the risk. "Here's what I'm offering," Marilyn continued, her voice firm in a way that people who only knew the breathy blonde persona would find surprising. "You book Ella for a week. I'll come to every performance. I'll sit in the front row, and I'll make sure the photographers know I'm there." Morrison understood immediately. Marilyn Monroe, photographed at the Mocambo every night, would generate publicity that money couldn't buy. Every major newspaper and magazine would cover it. The club would be associated with Hollywood's biggest star. The doors would be packed not just with regular customers, but with everyone who wanted to be where Marilyn was. And, Marilyn added, "I'll bring friends, people you want in your club." It was a calculated offer. Marilyn was using her power, her fame, her image, all the things that reduced her in so many ways as leverage for someone else's breakthrough. She was turning her objectification into a tool for justice. "Book Ella," Marilyn said again. "You won't regret it." Charlie Morrison agreed. How could he not? Marilyn Monroe was offering to make his club the center of Hollywood attention. The fact that it meant giving Ella Fitzgerald the stage she deserved was, from his perspective, an acceptable price for that level of publicity. But here's what made this more than just a transaction. Marilyn didn't have to do this. She gained nothing directly from Ella's success. They weren't friends yet, they'd never even met. Marilyn simply saw an injustice, recognized it through her own experience of being undervalued, and used the only currency she had, her fame, to correct it. The booking was announced. Ella Fitzgerald at the Mocambo for 1 week in March 1955. And true to her word, Marilyn Monroe was there opening night. Front row table, photographers everywhere. Every gossip columnist in Hollywood showed up, ostensibly to see what Marilyn was doing, but finding themselves confronted with something they couldn't ignore. Ella Fitzgerald's voice. That first night the club was packed beyond capacity. People stood against the walls. They sat on the floor near the stage. And yes, they came because Marilyn Monroe was there. But something shifted the moment Ella started singing. The room fell into a silence that felt almost sacred. Ella opened with "Summertime," her voice moving through the melody with such clarity and emotional depth that even the photographers stopped clicking. The song wasn't just performed, it was inhabited, transformed, given layers of meaning that Gershwin himself might not have fully understood until hearing Ella's interpretation. Marilyn sat at her front row table, watching not the stage but the audience around her. She watched their faces change, watched skepticism become awe, watched people who'd come for spectacle encounter artistry that demanded their full attention. When Ella finished the song, the applause was different from typical nightclub applause. It was sustained, genuine, carrying a note of surprise that bordered on shame. These people were realizing they'd almost missed this, that their own prejudice had nearly prevented them from experiencing something transcendent. Between sets, Marilyn did something that surprised everyone. She went backstage. Not with photographers, not with an entourage, just herself. She found Ella in the small dressing room, and for the first time they met face to face. "You're extraordinary," Marilyn said simply. Ella, who'd spent years navigating the complicated politics of gratitude and pride, said, "Thank you for making this happen." "I didn't make anything happen," Marilyn replied. "Your voice did that. I just made sure people showed up to hear it." They talked for 20 minutes. Two women who existed in completely different worlds within the same industry. Marilyn asked about scat singing, genuinely curious about the technical skill involved. Ella asked about acting, about how Marilyn maintained warmth in performances when surrounded by artifice, and something unexpected emerged from that conversation. Recognition, not just professional respect, but a deeper understanding that both of them were fighting to be seen as whole human beings, rather than symbols serving someone else's purpose. "People think because I'm famous, everything's easy," Marilyn admitted. "They don't understand that being looked at isn't the same as being seen." Ella nodded. "And they think because I can sing, that should be enough. Like I should be grateful for whatever access I'm given, even when it's a fraction of what my talent has earned." It was a quiet conversation, but it carried weight. Two women acknowledging that different forms of reduction, one based on appearance, one based on race, both served to keep them from being fully human in the public eye. But what happened next gave their connection even deeper meaning. Marilyn didn't just come to opening night. She came back. Every single performance that week, Different dress each night, same front row table, same genuine attention to the music. The photographers kept showing up, but the story started to shift. It wasn't just Marilyn Monroe attends nightclub. It became Ella Fitzgerald at the Mocambo, with Marilyn Monroe as part of the proof that this was an event worth attending. By the end of the week, something had fundamentally changed. The Mocambo had proven that booking Ella Fitzgerald wasn't a risk, it was a triumph. Other venues started calling. Suddenly the scheduling conflicts disappeared. The doors that had been closed began to open, and Ella never forgot what Marilyn had done. Years later, she would say, "Marilyn was there for me before anyone else. She was unusual, a little ahead of her time. She didn't see color. She just saw talent and humanity." But here's the part of the story that goes deeper than a simple good deed. The friendship that developed between Marilyn and Ella wasn't about one woman saving another. It was about two people recognizing each other's full humanity, despite the industry's determination to reduce them both to profitable symbols. They stayed in touch. Not publicized, not photographed, just genuine connection. Marilyn would call Ella before big performances, seeking grounding in someone who understood what it meant to perform under impossible expectations. Ella would share stories about the road, about audiences, about the constant negotiation between who you were and who people needed you to be. When Marilyn was struggling most intensely with the pressures of fame, battling studio executives who saw her only as a product, she'd sometimes call Ella late at night. They'd talk about music, about life, about anything except Hollywood's demands. Ella became a kind of anchor, someone whose success had come through undeniable talent rather than manipulation, someone who proved that authenticity could survive in an industry designed to manufacture it. And when Ella faced her own struggles, the exhaustion of constant touring, the physical toll of performing night after night, the emotional weight of being constantly exceptional because any slip would be used to justify the barriers she'd overcome, Marilyn understood. She understood performing through pain. She understood being strong when you felt broken. She understood the cost of other people's expectations. What they gave each other was something both rarely experienced. Permission to be tired. Permission to be uncertain. Permission to be human rather than legendary. The Mocambo week became a turning point in Ella's career. But not in the simple way the story is usually told. Yes, it opened doors. Yes, it led to more prestigious bookings. But more than that, it proved something Ella had always known but couldn't make others see. That talent could transcend prejudice if given the platform prejudice had denied. Marilyn's intervention didn't erase racism from the music industry. Ella would continue to face discrimination, continue to navigate spaces that questioned her presence. But the Mocambo established a precedent. It proved that audiences, given the chance, would choose artistry over their own prejudice. That the barrier wasn't about what white audiences could accept. It was about what gatekeepers assumed they couldn't. Years later, when Marilyn Monroe died in 1962, Ella was devastated. She'd lost more than a famous acquaintance. She'd lost one of the few people who'd genuinely seen her, who'd used their power not for personal gain, but for someone else's dignity. At Marilyn's funeral, Ella didn't speak publicly, but privately she mourned the loss of someone who'd understood that using your platform for others was the highest form of success. Someone who'd been reduced to beauty but possessed depth. Someone who'd been called dumb but demonstrated intelligence in the most meaningful way, recognizing injustice and refusing to accept it. The story of Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald is often told as a simple tale of celebrity kindness, one famous person helping another. But that version misses the profound truth underneath. This was a story about two women who were both invisible in different ways. Marilyn, seen constantly but never truly known. Ella, talented beyond measure but denied access because of her race, both reduced to partial versions of themselves by an industry that profited from their diminishment. And when they found each other, they didn't just exchange favors, they exchanged recognition. They gave each other the gift of being seen as complete human beings rather than profitable symbols. That phone call in 1955 changed Ella's career trajectory. But the friendship that followed changed something deeper. It proved that solidarity could exist between women with vastly different experiences. That power could be wielded for others. That fame could be a tool for justice rather than just a measure of success. Ella Fitzgerald went on to become one of the most celebrated vocalists in American history. 13 Grammy Awards. Presidential Medal of Freedom. A career that spanned 6 decades and influenced generations of singers. She broke barriers that seemed unbreakable, performed in venues that had once been closed to her, and proved that excellence could not be denied forever. But she never forgot that March week in 1955. Never forgot the woman who'd used her fame to open a door. Never forgot that sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure someone else gets the chance to be heard. And Marilyn Monroe, for all the tragedy that would mark her later years, had that moment, that choice, that phone call, evidence that she understood power not as something to hoard, but as something to share. That beneath the manufactured image was someone who recognized injustice and acted. The legacy of that phone call extends beyond Ella's career or Marilyn's kindness. It became a template, a proof of concept. Other artists started using their platforms to challenge the industry's discriminatory practices. Other white performers started questioning why venues they played wouldn't book black artists of equal or greater talent. The change was slow, painfully slow, but it was movement. And it started with two women who refused to accept that the world's cruelty was inevitable. Today, when people hear Ella Fitzgerald's recordings, they're hearing a voice that almost didn't get the platform it deserved. They're hearing excellence that was nearly confined to spaces where mainstream America wouldn't encounter it. And they're hearing the result of one woman's decision to make a phone call that didn't benefit her directly but corrected an injustice she couldn't ignore. That's the real story. Not just about what Marilyn did for Ella, but about what both women understood. That being seen, truly seen, is one of the most profound human needs. That using whatever power you have to help someone else be seen is one of the most meaningful things you can do. And that sometimes, the most important legacy isn't what you accomplish for yourself, but who you make room for in spaces that tried to keep them out. Ella Fitzgerald's voice was always extraordinary, but Marilyn Monroe's phone call made sure the world couldn't ignore it. And in doing so, both women proved that solidarity, recognition, and courage could exist even in an industry built on their reduction. The phone rang at 2:47 in the afternoon, and 3 minutes later, the door began to open. Not just for Ella Fitzgerald, but for everyone who came after, carrying talent the world wasn't ready to acknowledge but could no longer deny.